your community, can you just give us a bit of an idea about how big it is now works kind of thing?
It's extremely rural. We might have 200 people living within, I have to do the math, 5 kilometers. We live in agrarian anarchy. Anarchy is not chaos. Anarchy is taking responsibility for yourself and for your neighbors. And it's in a really eclectic group of people. There are a handful of multimillionaires, people with access to a lot of fiat currency, and they choose to live there because they love the place. And there are several people who are really financially poor, and they could live as they live there, any place, but they choose to live there because they love the place. There are 13 people sharing a land trust 1.6 kilometers up the road from me, and those 13 people have a single source of water in the center of the property. It's a solar pump, and they all haul water every day back to their off-grid house. Most of the houses were built by the individual there by hand. So they're rock and they're tar paper, and they're an astonishing assortment of creative buildings. Very locally, my community is comprised of my wife and I, and we share 1 hectare with another couple and their 9-year-old son, who we refer to as the 9-year-old in charge. And he knows he is, so we just, whatever. And then we regularly gift and barter with 40 or 50 individuals, and less frequently with another 100 or so. There's very little commerce there. The nearest real town with a grocery store is 50 kilometers away, so it's quite rural.
I understand that the States has reduced its oil consumption by about 9 or 10%, possibly because of decreasing discretionary incomes, but at the same time there's been extra oil from fracking from the shale rock, which but this is leading to quite a bit of confusion, I think, with some people, because in the States oil imports have gone down, so they think, oh, look, it's not peak oil at all. We're increasing. We've got this increase in oil production, but those individual wells only last for 1 to 3 years, I understand, but they burn tens of thousands of them, so that is a reasonable amount of oil. But what's your take on that?
Well, shale oil is a financial play, it has very little to do with energy per se. The energy return on investment for shale oil is barely above 1. So that's no way to get energy. It's a way to make money while the world burns, which is what corporations are particularly good at. So for the most part, it's a money-making operation, not an energy-making operation. The United States has this amazing treaty we signed with Canada. No other country would sign a treaty like this. The treaty says that any oil extracted and delivered in Canada goes to the United States first. So literally that's our oil up there.
You've got a big army.
Well, yeah. And Canadians are so nice. Oh, no, go ahead, take it. No, we don't need it. So it's absurd. So another thing, when you look at domestic oil extraction, what most people call production, as if we go out and make oil. And you had a big day today when it made some oil. No, we extract it. The Earth and its planetary process is actually making. So a lot of people think that the United States is generating a lot more oil, is extracting a lot more oil, but much of that is coming from Canada. And we're just claiming it as our own because the treaty says it's our own. And then there's, of course, the horrific tar sands and the horrific shale oil and the fracking. And if you haven't seen the movie Gasland, I recommend it. See what happens to your water coming out of the taps when you give in to a money-making scheme like that. So it's all horrible, basically. We shouldn't think about it at all. Let's go home and eat cake.
Yes, I'm interested that yourself and Nicole Foss, for example, have carved out a living in the countryside. Now, I mean, just realistically, not everybody can just move en masse out of the city. So if you were still in the city, would you do so anyway, or have you any thoughts from your discussions with other people about doing this sort of thing in the city, where a lot of people are employed from day to day and, you know, have to sort of measure up at work and get on with things to put bread on the table, and are a bit preoccupied, even though they might know that the world is going to hell in a handbasket. So it's a little bit complex in the city. Any thoughts on this?
I left the city in part for ethical reasons. Tucson, Arizona has more than 1 million people, and it imports all of its water nearly 500 kilometers across the desert, uphill, through open canals. And all the fossil fuels are brought in from outside, all the food is brought in from outside.
And it's very broad.
So I can hardly keep pointing out the dark underbelly of industrial civilization while living at the apex of empire and look at myself in the mirror. So I felt compelled to leave Tucson. Another reason was I just don't think, well, cities are the example of civilization. Cities require importation of all goods and services for people to survive. The country makes the clean air and makes the clean water and generates to a great extent the food. That's not the cities doing that. So cities are civilization, and I don't think that's a good thing.
No, if
Personally.
everybody moved out, then the countryside would be like a suburbia.
Absolutely, we're in human population overshoot. That's what that means. Yes, there's not enough room for all the people on the planet, especially if we don't keep propping them up with the use of fossil fuels. And soon we won't be propping them up with fossil fuels. And so the human population will decline. I suspect it will decline like populations of most organisms do, quickly and catastrophically. There.
A lot of what you were saying involved circles around politics and economics, political systems, and it's already been pointed out that it's okay for a few people out in the countryside to think they can look after themselves. We have some areas in New Zealand, I know of areas where people have opted out and gone to live in a country area, mostly people who have enough money to buy a bit of property out there. But that isn't feasible for the most. And with these, you've only touched on a few elements of the problems we're facing, but worse, what you've painted.
I'm such an optimist, aren't I?
What political system do you think of? I mean, we have to think of that en masse. We have to change politics. And I don't hear anybody talking about a changed political system anywhere. You'll know that many of the environmentalists want to keep the present political system really unchanged and add a tax here or a little, you know. But inform that. What are your thoughts about that? I'm talking about the national level.
The system is irredeemably corrupt. We should terminate it.
But that means revolution. You see what I mean? I'm getting at something. If you really mean it, it means we have to start an armed revolution, which is impossible.
I'm not saying that a revolution is a bad idea. What I did was walk away from empire. There's an expression in the medieval period, walk away from the king. If enough people walk away from the king loses all of his power. We can do the same thing. Will there be enough room for all the people in the country? No, of course not. There's not enough room for all the people in the country, in the world right now. But New Zealanders have it great, by the way. It rains here.
No, please don't kid yourself.
Relative to where I live on a rock-bound desert, you have all this ocean around you, so global climate change will proceed much more slowly than it does in the interior of large continents, especially in the northern hemisphere. You haven't completely lost gardening culture yet, as we have in the United States. Nobody knows how to grow anything in the United States. Nobody's interested, for that matter. So you have tremendous advantages relative to most places that I've been and seen. Will it be enough? We don't know, do we? So let's put our shoulders to the wheel and try to make it enough. I don't see any other way about it. It might not be sufficient, but it certainly won't be sufficient if we don't give it a shot. So I'm a fan of anarchy, of agrarian anarchy, in the spirit of Henry David Thoreau and Wendell Berry and Howard Zinn and Edward Abbey and, to a certain extent, Thomas Jefferson. Will that work at large scale without slaves? Maybe not.
Just a comment about living in the city and gardening and agriculture and so on. I'm reading a book at the moment called Food in the City, written by an American woman who's gone around the world looking at cities and how they're growing. It's a movement called urban agriculture, which everyone knows about because we're all doing that. But, you know, she makes the point that in countries like America, where there's so much monoculture, actually gardening in the city in a permaculture way is bringing back the biodiversity. And in fact, there's more bees in some American cities than there are left out in the countryside. So I think you know, those of us who live in a city and like our community are building more gardens and so on, community gardens within the city is a really good move, a way to go.
Yes, you should be concerned about water coming through the taps.
Yeah.
So that requires political leadership. You're fortunate to have the mayor sitting right here in your midst. I've never seen that before anywhere I've spoken. It's astonishing. I've never been to a community where any political leader was actually interested in powering down and permaculture.
Oh,
And that's the future we're headed for.
The Wellington mayor is also.
Kidding.
We have a regional councillor here as well, guys, and Paul Cruz, and the Wellington Regional Council.
So, like I said, I've never seen this before, and there are no politically viable solutions at scale to global climate change or energy decline. But there are politically viable solutions at the level of community, but that requires you to push.
Thank you so much for coming this distance and for your information. My question builds neatly onto that question of political organisation. In the post-collapse world, you've got communities of a certain size that can exist independently. And then I'm wondering if you're aware of people having thought the next step as to how those individual communities might relate to each other such that you have peaceable organisation. I'm not talking high-level national society. I totally appreciate the scale you're doing it, but it's a question of scale as to how much you can get organisation beyond the individual unit. Have you looked into that?
Yeah, I mean, probably the best example is Cuba and the collapse of the Soviet Union caused Cuba to face a world with 90% less oil than they had the week before, suddenly, overnight. Now, they had the advantage of having a totalitarian dictatorship government, which we don't typically think of as an advantage, but suddenly, all effort was dedicated, and all the education system was focused on growing food and public health. Because you can do that, you can make a sudden, dramatic change in a relatively small populace with a totalitarian government. Within 2 years, the city of Havana, Cuba, a city of more than 2 million people, was growing 50% of the food for the people within the city boundary. So there are examples. It will be much easier for people and other animals if we start in advance than if we wait and do what Cuba did. Wait for the thing to collapse and then start figuring out what to do. You know what we need. We need water, food, the ability to maintain our body temperatures, and a decent human community. And we've been doing that for a couple million years. It's not beyond the pale of our imagination.
Well, I'd like to know in Cuba, you mentioned barter and you know, using other ways of meeting one another's needs. And I don't know if you can answer this. Did barter and more formalised systems of exchange take place during that time in Cuba?
I don't know. I have no idea. What I'm trying to promote in my community is an economy based on gifts. I'm less interested in barter, although it makes people uncomfortable to a certain extent to have a gift economy. But I prefer a gift economy, and so...
So that would be a little bit along the lines of Charles Eisenstein's idea?
Yes, and it's how we spent the first 2 million years of the human experience, after all.
Yeah.
So,
It may take us a little while to transition to that.
of course, I might. Indeed, it might. Pam, you had a question?
It was a question about innovation. I work in a government agency and there's a lot of talk about innovation and the need for that. But listening to you and others tonight seems that the answer lies in actually going back to things that we've known for a very long time. But I'm wondering how important you see the place of like technological innovation, for example, or whether we must wave that goodbye because that relies on stuff that we won't have.
I think a vast majority of what we consider to be technology is going away. And we should be focusing on things like hand tools and hand pumps and simple, durable technology. We have solar panels, but the life of those is 5,000 cycles. That's 5,000 days. So that means 12 years. So all we've done by getting a PV solar bank going, we're still limited by the battery bank. So we're limited to maybe 12 years of having electrical power. So then we'll be back in the 1700s, just like everybody else, but we're transitioning there a bit more slowly than some people. I thought you were talking about physical elevation, and I'm thinking 70-meter sea level rise, which is what happens when we get about 2 degrees centigrade, is something I want to keep in mind.
No, innovation.
Innovation.
Oh, innovation.
Innovation.
People talk funny, you know.
One of those buzzwords.
Right. What do you have a question over here? Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to raise, possibly regarded as a spectre of geoengineering to deal with the greenhouse gases. I suppose it's kind of a probably regressive way of looking at things compared to the rest of what you were projecting, but what have you got
Yeah,
to say about that?
that's a good question. Geoengineering, the world leader in geoengineering is a guy named Roger Angel, who's a colleague of mine at the University of Arizona. And he says that it'll take 20 years or so before we can get the system launched so that we can have enough mirrors at the L1 Lagrange 1 point to reduce the temperature of the Earth.
So that's one way of doing it. There's
I'm pretty sure we don't have 20 years, by the way.
yeah, but there's injecting sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere.
Oh, sure, yes. And in fact,
You might not be
Yeah.
comfortable about.
in fact, that's what Malcolm Light proposes of the Arctic Methane Emergency Group, is that we use geoengineering, including techniques such as that. And it's hard for me to believe that we wouldn't screw it up. Seriously.
Yeah, sort of one level it's quite simple. You're trying to replicate a major volcanic eruption like Mount Pinatubo or something, and it's just a hell of a lot of burnt sulfur on one level. But
Yeah, I'm reluctant.
yeah, me too.
You know, every time we try to ratchet up the engineering to extend our technology a little bit more, we end up making the situation worse. So,
Don't you just end up with less solar radiation, which makes particles grow?
sorry.
Don't you just, if you put particles into the atmosphere, don't you just decrease the amount of sunlight that reaches the Earth's surface? So that's going to decrease the amount of plants grow. So you shoot yourself in the foot with the cure.
Yes. So it's easy for me to imagine that we try to put a bunch of particles up in the atmosphere and we end up generating nuclear cooling.
Guys, question here.
You talked about an economy of gifts. Could you explain that in a little more detail? So you could-
Yes, so what humans did for the first 2 million years was rely on the economy of gifts, not barter. Barter assumes that there's some currency that's available. So when I give you a wheel of my Parmesan cheese, I expect in a barter system something back that is worth $427. I know what it takes to make Parmesan cheese, and it's a big deal. In gifting, I give you a block of my Parmesan cheese, and I keep gifting, and other people are gifting, and if after a while people give you a whole bunch of gifts and you never return a gift, you're going to fall out of favor with members of the community. But there's no keeping score, per se. There's no keeping track of what you owe me and I owe you. There is just contributing to a decent human community, which is what the whole thing should be about anyway. So how do we evaluate my ability to make cheese versus your ability to make an atlatl that we can use to kill a rat. You know, those are completely different things.
Sorry, could you say the last word again?
I can't imagine I could. I shouldn't have said that. How about bow and arrow?
The device.
A device for killing an animal. So these things are not congruous, right? So we can measure the amount of time it takes for me to do this and for you to do that, but then we get into that situation where we're keeping track of time again, and that's where civilization arose. That's where civilization went off the tracks. So I don't want to do that anymore.
So, just trying to formalize this. So you would say no to time banking because you find it a bit too formalized.
That's right. I would say no to time banking. And I've written about this on my blog. Words to Give By, I think is the name of the essay.
Can I just add a point?
Sure.
After you've explained it, I think that's what I'm doing already. I belong to a food group in the suburb of Brooklyn here in Wellington, and we have a private shared garden which the owner has gifted, right? And he also joins in, he's quite active, and that garden produces a whole lot of food. And there's one or two people who do quite a lot of the work, but there are a number of us who take part in it, and the food is available, and nobody keeps any books.
Right. But it's easy to imagine that if nobody's keeping the books and somebody keeps taking all the stuff, that thing's going to fall apart. Right. So there's this peer pressure for everybody to behave in a humane way.
That's what we do.
That's wacky, isn't it?
There's a society called the Tiwi people that live on the islands north of Darwin. And my son, who's a doctor trained at Melbourne University, 9 years old, he was sent up here to locum for 3 months. And he said it was the strangest experience he's ever had because it is a gift-based society. And he said within 24 hours he realized on his mega salary that he was the poorest person in the village. And he would get these every month, every 2 weeks he'd get a food parcel from Darwin. And the locals were not interested in it. They had their things they grew and the places they hunted, and somebody would drag a beast in and throw it at somebody's doorstep, you know, and they'd share it out, and that person would never expect anything. But it wasn't until my son started making things, and he made some bread, and he gave it to somebody and walked away, and then they started leaving things. And he had it was a real shock to his, you know, European civilized mind being thrown in this, but actually when he came away from there, he felt very sad to return to Melbourne. And he's incorporated that in his psyche. And, you know, when I heard about the situation, of course, as a mother, I wanted to rescue him. He said, no, this is fantastic. We should all be living this way. And it's totally functional.
Like I said, without money, we'll all be rich.
Exactly.
Life-affirming ways that actually matter.
Yeah.
Oh, just what you think of this idea. My kind of particular beef on this thing is to say, well, look, turning your back on this, one of the biggest, simplest things to do is just turn your back on air travel. So that's been my thing, is it's the most direct way that you can simply chop out the biggest single carbon emission you've got, but also send the signal that you're really serious about that approach. And I know you probably got the question from Kim Hill about travel. I think someone of the last people used it. But as a general approach, what do you think of that as an idea? I mean, just for people to say, look, at least we're cutting out all non-essential air travel, holiday-related, etc., and walking away from that.
What I suggest is that people stop consuming, except, interestingly enough, oil. I'm trying to spike the price of oil. I'm just going to terminate the sale levy arrangements. So
that's a very unsensitive.
What's that?
That's a nonsense answer.
That's a nonsense answer, really?
Yeah.
Bring it on.
Isn't it?
No. Most people.
So
think
you're
most of the
suggesting
time.
we should go out of here with the numbers that you've given us about extinction shortly, and you think the best thing we should do tonight, your answer is that we should probably go out and buy big cars, in spite the price of oil. That's your advice?
I think that the best thing you can do, I think there are many things we can do.
That's what you just said, isn't it?
I didn't say that was the best thing we could do, but I do agree that it's a good thing to do, yes.
Ah.
I'm trying to terminate the said living arrangements by spiking the price of oil. Spikes in the price of oil lead to recession. So I want to bring it down. I don't want to keep it going. Also, there's something called Jevons paradox, which we've known about since William Stanley Jevons published a book in 1865 called The Coal Question. Jevons paradox says that with respect to finite materials, and he was talking about coal, obviously, if you don't use them, somebody else will. That's Jevons paradox. It's been formalized by two economists, Kazum and Brooks, as the Kazum-Brooks postulate. So if we don't use the oil, guess what? Somebody in China will. So let's all do it. Just drive up the demand and drive up the price and terminate the civil living arrangements. Stunningly, even though it seems counterintuitive, it's not a nonsense answer. Although I'm sort of noted for those two.
So your approach is to say, since the warming is happening anyway, it'll make it more catastrophic, but only so much, so it can bring the whole thing down.
Right, and I don't suggest, by the way, burning any other fossil fuels.
Yeah, but flying is a big emission, you know that.
Oh yeah, yes, it's also a big demand on oil.
That's
So-
ethically, that's pretty interesting, isn't it? But for what you're telling us about how we should progress our lives, back off those living arrangements, but in this area you should say basically go out, get a big car, burn oil, perhaps even put it in your backyard in a barrel and burn it. Is that what you're suggesting? I mean, that would be more direct, wouldn't it?
I suspect actually it's going to produce very little impact because the U.S. military uses more
Well, you're
oil
changing
in
your argument.
a weekend than
You're
you do
changing
in
your
whole
argument
life.
now.
But that said, yes, I suggest people burn oil.
So you suggest I go and buy, for example, directly, I should buy some barrels of oil. It's an advanced thing to do. Put it in my backyard, burn it. Is that what you're suggesting?
Why don't you just stick it below ground instead? Why don't you not burn it? Why don't you just take it out of the
You
system?
want to spike the price.
not burn it?
That's what you just told me.
Right. But don't burn it.
Stockpile it.
Stockpile it. Save it for a rainy
So
day.
ethically, that's a better thing to do than flying, isn't it?
Yes.
For fun.
Yes,
Okay. That's my opinion.
absolutely.
Good.
It's got to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. We've been working on this for 25 years. We don't live 50 miles, kilometers away. And there's a real issue that comes up in our little clutch in our neighborhood that's growing in awareness. And we've got PV arrays, solar panels, organic gardening, waters, the things you have, we have, but we're much closer to mainstream towns. We just live right outside, 10 minutes outside of a hut. Now, a conversation that comes up is, we're trying to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, cutting down on commuting and all that kind of stuff. I will work only in my community, which is Timber and Silver Stream. So I was unemployed for a while, but then it worked out. So I'm a teacher. So one of the discussions we have is my son, who's 25, says, fine, we can do all this stuff. When the you-know-what hits the fan, everybody from Wellington is going to come out, and it's going to be chaos, and they're going to kill us and take all our stuff. So that's a real concern. So either we get the city people to hurry along and be part of the solution, so there's not such a drastic difference between what happens in the city and the great masses of population and what we're doing out there. Or what? Do you have these discussions? What happens when I'm into anarchy as well? It works well. But what happens when the other people are not, but they see your stuff and they want it?
Well, where I live, a long way from any city, it's difficult for me to imagine Americans being aware enough and well organized enough to rally us marauding hordes and come out to the homestead.
Haven't you watched those sensationalist movies?
I don't foresee a Mad Max future. And furthermore, well, where I live, on the fourth day without water coming out of the taps, everybody in Tucson, Arizona is going to keel over dead. Because they'll be waiting for the government to turn the water back on.
But this is New Zealand. And we got a lot of keen trampers, and 40 kilometers is nothing for them.
Right.
And hunters,
This is actually a really good opportunity for a bit of advice for the mayor, perhaps, that in the very near future, you may want to mandate that nobody living in a city can grow a lawn. Because that is a waste of, huge waste of resources.
edible garden.
Absolutely. If you foresee, in my opinion, those who foresee a Mad Max future are just foregoing responsibility.
Explain.
I can't do anything because the marauding hordes are going to come. Why would I bother?
Oh no, but we're doing lots, heaps. We've got bountiful property.
And you foresee a Mad Max future.
I foresee sharing a lot, and we've talked about how many people our property can support. And I'm into sharing, okay, and maybe people will bring skills. I'm into incorporating and teaching.
So no, you don't foresee a Mad Max future.
I don't, but there are younger people coming through that do. But maybe they spend too much time on the computer.
Why do they foresee a Mad Max future? Because it allows them to set aside all responsibility. I don't have to do anything because they're going to kill me when I try to do anything anyway.
Part of that could be.
We can't see the future, but we get to make the future.
Yeah,
So let's make it better than the recent past.
I'm sort of partly somebody involved with organising a time bank, and so I just want to follow up about your saying that you weren't too happy with time banks. That it is not really substituting hours for dollars. It is very much a community building. This is a commercial in a way, I know. A community building exercise that everybody's time, everybody can contribute. And it's a way of getting people to know each other and to feel valuable. Out of that, once you've got that community, it's growing, then you could lead on to your gifting economy. But people have got to know each other first before that could happen.
I said I preferred an economy of gifts to barter, but we do a lot of barter in my property because other people are uncomfortable with gifting. I think anything we do outside of the contemporary mainstream culture is a good idea. Anything that we do is different because what we're doing now is catastrophe at every level. So let's do anything different, anything at all, except eating the faces off other people. I don't like that.
There'd be very few communities, probably anywhere in the world, who could have enough food, water, heat, and community with four things you say we need.
Actually,
without a major reduction in population.
There's 3 or 4 billion people right now living in this world and doing just that. We don't know them because we're born into captivity. We're born into industrialized worlds and we think this is normal. This is not normal. You know what's normal? Those 3 or 4 billion people living in community and growing all their own food. That's what's normal.
We've got golf courses.
This is extremely unusual, particularly historically.
I just wanted to return to the topic of geoengineering that was raised before. It's something I research among other things, and I'm intrigued at your response because the way I look at the climate analysis is not so different from yours. I see some slightly different feedback effect, trigger points and so on, but give or take that. Geoengineering, I suspect, is going to become a reality whether it's planned intergovernmentally or by a single entity. The question is whether it buys us time, or I think in the way you're pitching it, it exacerbates the problem, but not so much through an inability to manipulate the temperatures correctly, but through the pattern continuing. But if it does buy time, I'm intrigued whether you are thinking to not allow that into your analysis in this way because it mixes up messages and doesn't give perhaps as clear a path. Is it a communications issue you have, or do you believe analytically that it is never going to work out decently or it's too crazy a risk? How do you discriminate there?
I want to turn to the medical argument of first do no harm.
Yeah, the trouble is we're already terminal on an existing PPM. Left alone on any reasonable trajectory. It's not going to cut tomorrow. It's going to have a trajectory, even if you have a collapse, it will go down. There's too much carbon in the atmosphere anyway. So we're already getting feedback effects. So then what do you do?
I am not smart enough to have the answer to that question. And I'm pretty sure the wise apes, sapiens means wise, isn't wise enough to answer that question either.
I think it's an
US Army or the US military get hold of geotechnology, geoengineering technology, they're going to misuse it. A big enough army will misuse it for their own purposes.
Well, that's what guys
That would be my guess. Yeah.
Which gets back to control structures, because depending on how that is used, depending on who has their fingers on the controls on that, different regions of the earth get different treatment, either by intent or just by random, because it's not their control. But it starts to set a different framework for how you think about working through the solutions here, and that's where it becomes a critical juncture.
Yes, well, I hope we don't have enough time to actually address that question. But I hope we have lights out long before we have to worry about geoengineering a solution to a problem we've created.
Talking of which, I think perhaps I'm just aware that we've got an early flight in the morning.
And I'm almost dead right now.
Yeah, I think we'll wrap up the questions soon, so perhaps just one or two more and then if that's okay, we'll
Just
make some cake.
just informational, probably a lot of people already know about free cycle, which may not, the computer network, server network may not continue, but at the present time, free cycle is a really good way of giving away things that you don't need and getting stuff for free. Just the other information thing is that like Hutt Valley, I understand, has these extremely fertile soils, and it used to be market gardens, but even despite of all the houses, there's still quite a bit of space left. But if we would maximise that space, but also to realise that it is a floodplain, and in the regional council we're putting up flood banks, which is going to raise the rates by about 5% every year for the next 10 years to pay for them, and but that gives prediction for 200-year floods. But the floods frequencies are likely to, the return periods are likely to go down to about 1 in 50 years instead of 1 in 200 years. So there's no guarantee for the long term, and it's only going to cost us some rates. But just to be aware that actually it's the best place for growing, but not the best place to live in the way we are at present times.
I'd be very surprised if we had to worry about 10 years from now.
I want to ask a really simple question about animals. What kind of animals grow well where you are as in domesticated livestock and things like that? What kind of things have you got in a desert environment?
We have chickens, ducks, turkeys, heirloom turkeys for the first time this year, worms for our worm farm, and goats. Goats for milk and cheese.
Vegetarian?
I am not a strict vegetarian. I'm mostly vegetarian. When I travel, I stay in the homes of my hosts, and so I adhere to a strict seafood diet. If I see food, I eat it. Thank you all. I'll stay around for as long as anybody has any further questions or discussion.